A man's fortune, a banker's secret, and a single clue that could shatter both. Welcome to WordScript Den. I'm your host, Denora. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Your comments mean the world to me. Let's begin the mystery. I was 3 gulps into my morning coffee, just far enough along that the world looked tolerable, but not so far that I'd forgive it for existing, when the doorbell rang. Not once, not twice, but in a deliberate triple tap that made me think of Morse code for trouble. Now, when the bell rings before noon, there are only 2 kinds of people it can be: delivery boys who misread an address, or visitors who misread the odds of getting past Nero Wolfe's threshold before lunch. Fritz was busy in the kitchen with something that smelled like calf's liver. Don't ask me why. And Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids, so I played doorman. The man on the stoop didn't look lost. He looked owned. About 50, round-shouldered but expensively dressed, with a face that had been rearranged by the twin artists of worry and whiskey. His suit was better than mine, his tie worse, and the way he clutched his briefcase made me think he was holding onto it for balance rather than business. "Mr. Goodwin?" His voice was careful, like he was testing the air pressure. "Depends," I said. "If you're selling encyclopedias, I'm Fritz Brenner. If it's the gas bill, I'm Nero Wolfe. But if you've come to see Mr. Wolfe himself, you'll have to take your chances. He doesn't open shop before orchids." The man tried for a smile and failed. "My name is Henry Carter. I must see Mr. Wolfe. It concerns a matter of—" He paused, looked around as if the shrubbery might be listening, and dropped his voice. "A matter of life and death. That line has been used before. 99 times out of 100, the death turns out to be metaphorical, and the life turns out to be someone else's wallet." But Cotter had a way of saying it that made me think. He'd been brushing shoulders with the literal kind. I let him in. When Wolfe finally descended, 3 minutes later than he'd promised, and 5 pounds heavier than he'd been yesterday, if my eyes weren't lying, Cotter was sitting in the red leather chair across from Wolfe's desk, clutching his briefcase like it contained the cure for cancer or the cause of it. Wolfe lowered himself into his own chair with the ceremony of a pope and regarded Cotter through half-closed eyes. "Mr. Cotter," Wolfe said, "you have intruded on my morning. This presupposes urgency." "Pray state it." Cotter swallowed, opened the briefcase, and drew out a single manila envelope. He laid it on the desk like it might explode. "I'm a banker," he said, "or was until yesterday. What's in this envelope cost a man his life. And if I can't stop what's coming, it may cost me mine." That got Wolfe to open his eyes fully. He still didn't touch the envelope, but the room got warmer, the way it does when a big cat notices the twitch of a rabbit. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my legs. My hunch was that Henry Cotter wasn't here to deposit a check, and if Wolfe didn't take this case, I'd still be the one sent running after the facts. And I knew one thing already: bankers may count money, but they rarely count bodies. Would you like me to continue with Section 2, the brownstone disturbed, where outsiders breach Wolfe's sanctuary and Cotter's fatal secret starts unraveling? Wolfe didn't move, didn't extend a finger toward the envelope. He just sat there, his bulk filling the chair like a monarch on a throne, letting the silence stretch so taut you could have plucked it and gotten a note out of it. Cotter shifted in his seat, glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. His face had the sheen of a man unused to being ignored, which meant he had probably spent a lifetime convincing clerks, secretaries and junior vice presidents to leap at his crook of a finger. Now he was meeting someone who wouldn't lift a hand even if the house were on fire, unless it suited him. Finally, Wolfe spoke, his voice as measured as if he were dictating a recipe. "Mr. Cotter, I do not touch objects until I am assured they will not soil my hands. What is in that envelope that should merit my attention?" Cotter wet his lips. His hand went instinctively to the envelope as if he wanted to shield it. "It's records, copies, they show—" He broke off, closed his mouth, and gave Wolfe a look as if realizing how close he'd come to letting the noose slip over his own neck. "They show something a man would kill for." "Did kill for yesterday," I raised an eyebrow. "That's a tall claim. You saying you know someone's been murdered?" Cotter's eyes darted to me, then back to Wolfe. "I'm not just saying it. I saw it." His fingers drummed once on the briefcase, and he leaned forward. "And unless you help me, they'll come for me next. Now, I've heard plenty of tall tales in that office, and most of them collapse before they reach the ceiling. But the way Cotter said it with that cracked porcelain voice gave the impression he wasn't dealing from a full deck, but wasn't bluffing either. Wolfe closed his eyes again as though disappointed in the caliber of humanity. You must be precise, sir. Who has been murdered, and what business of it is yours? Cotter hesitated, then leaned closer across the desk, lowering his voice. His name was Victor Talbot, senior partner at the bank. He was my mentor. He brought me in 30 years ago, and yesterday morning I found him in his office, dead. I felt the air tighten. Murder doesn't come strolling into our brownstone every day. Sure, people claim it, wave it around like a circus banner, but most often Wolfe brushes it aside until the police put ink to paper. But Cotter wasn't finished. There were marks, he said hoarsely, on his throat. His body was slumped by the desk. The bank hushed it up, said he had a seizure, natural causes. They whisked him out before anyone but the senior board knew. But I saw the truth. I saw the bruises, and I know why they silenced it. Because if word got out, if what's in that envelope saw daylight, the whole institution would burn. Cotter sagged back in the chair, as if he'd just emptied the tank. Wolfe's lips curled, not in a smile but in that peculiar inward twist he used when the scent of a puzzle floated toward him like a soufflé carried by Fritz. Mr. Cotter, Wolfe murmured, if your story is accurate, you have introduced two intolerable notions. First, that a murder has occurred. Second, that it has been concealed by those whose function is fiduciary guardianship. Both are odious. I dislike being odious, but I dislike even more the possibility of being made a fool. If I accept this matter, it is because I choose, not because you tremble on my carpet. Do you understand me? Cotter nodded quickly, his Adam's apple bobbing like it wanted out. Wolfe gestured faintly, still not touching the envelope. Archie, if you would. I stretched across the desk and drew the envelope toward me, careful not to shake any invisible anthrax off the flap. Inside were half a dozen typed sheets, photocopied neat as sermon notes. I glanced through them, though the lingo was banker speak. Investment portfolios, transfer ledgers, loan accounts. But even I could see something was off. Numbers had been doctored, whole sums bouncing between shell companies like pinballs. I whistled. Looks like your bank's been playing Santa Claus to the wrong stockings. Millions shuffled where they shouldn't be. Cotter clenched his fists. Talbot found it first. He confided in me. He said it led straight to one man, a man too powerful to accuse without proof. That's why he called me in. And now Talbot is dead. His voice cracked. I'm not a coward, Mr. Wolfe, but I can't fight them alone. If I go to the police, I'll be discredited, or worse. You have the reputation, the authority. If you expose this, they won't dare touch me. That was when Wolfe sat forward just slightly, which in his case is the equivalent of another man leaping on the table. His eyes gleamed. You impugn men of wealth and influence. You suggest murder cloaked as apoplexy. And you come to me, not the police. Why? Cotter's voice dropped. Because I believe the police are already bought. Now that, I admit, was a line worth the entrance fee. I watched Wolfe's face. He didn't flinch, didn't so much as blink. He simply sat absorbing it the way granite absorbs rain. Finally, Wolfe said, Very well. I shall consider. Cotter's face fell. Consider? But silence. Wolfe's voice cut like a paper blade. Archie will accompany you back to your lodgings. He will assess whether you are indeed as imperiled as you claim. If you have been followed, we shall know. If you are bait, we shall also know. Meanwhile, you will leave this envelope with me. Cotter hesitated, then nodded, reluctant but resigned. He rose slowly, clutching the briefcase, but leaving the envelope where it lay on Wolfe's desk. As I grabbed my hat from the rack, Wolfe closed his eyes again. Archie, he said, do not be careless. A banker may not be worth a man's time, but $10 million certainly is. Cotter and I stepped out into the early afternoon. The sun was sharp, the air brittle. I tucked my hands in my pockets and gave him a sidelong look. Mr. Cotter, one small question before we go strolling through the wolves' den. Who exactly do you think killed Victor Talbot? He looked straight ahead, his face pale as chalk. The man who now controls the bank. Harold Vance. He's charming, ruthless, and he has everyone dancing to his tune. If Talbot threatened to expose him, he wouldn't hesitate. He shuddered. He already owns the city, and if I'm not careful, he'll own me, 6 feet under. That gave me enough to chew on as we headed down the steps. I had the sense Wolfe had just set the stage, and I was about to walk right into the play. Would you like me to continue with the suspect introductions, where Archie's legwork starts drawing the circle tighter around Vance and the other players? Cotter and I didn't talk much on the ride downtown. He sat stiff in the back seat of the cab, hands folded on the briefcase like it was a casket. I let him keep his thoughts, partly because his nerves were jangling loud enough for both of us, partly because I was saving my questions for later. Wolfe had given me my assignment: get Cotter home, size him up, sniff the wind for trouble, and I had no intention of reporting back with only a weather forecast. The address he gave was a respectable high-rise on the Upper East Side, one of those buildings with a doorman who could tell your income bracket by the shine of your shoes. Carter gave the man a nod that didn't get returned, which told me his stock wasn't exactly soaring with the help these days. We rode the elevator up to the 8th floor, where Cotter's apartment turned out to be comfortable but not ostentatious. Expensive taste pared down. The kind of place a man keeps when he wants to look successful, without anyone asking how. Once inside, Cotter went straight to the liquor cabinet. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, knocked it back, and looked like he wanted to pour a gallon more. I wandered over to the window, taking in the view. Rooftops, smokestacks, the city spread out like an endless chessboard. "All right," I said, turning to him. "You've got yourself a safe haven here. But safe havens are only as safe as the people who know about them. Who else knows you've got those documents?" He shook his head quickly. "No one. Talbot entrusted them to me. He said if anything happened, I was to act." "But His voice cracked. I froze. I didn't know what to do. Then he was dead. "And now?" "Now you're scared stiff," I said, not unkindly. "Fair enough. Fear's healthy if it keeps you moving. But tell me, this Harold Vance, you think he's got the muscle to send someone after you?" Cotter's laugh was short and bitter. "He doesn't send muscle. He sends favors, debts, whispers. One word from him and a man loses his job, his reputation, his friends. Or his pulse. He never gets his hands dirty. That's why the board obeys him. That's why the police look the other way." I watched him closely. His hands trembled slightly as he set the glass down, but his eyes, despite the fear, held a thread of determination. Wolfe would want to know that. A man who trembles but doesn't run still has uses. "Fine," I said. "Here's how it's going to go. You stay put. Don't open the door for anyone but me, Wolfe, or Fritz. If the phone rings, let it ring. If someone comes knocking, you forget you live here. Understood?" He nodded, swallowing hard. I left him with his bottle and his paranoia and stepped back out into the hallway. My instincts were nagging, so I lingered by the elevator a moment, listening. The building was quiet, but not the kind of quiet I liked. It was the muffled quiet of people who didn't want to be noticed. Back on the street, I took a walk around the block. Twice. No one followed me, but that didn't mean no one had followed Cotter before. If Wolfe was right, and when wasn't he? The moment Cotter handed over that envelope, he put a target square on his back. By the time I got back to the brownstone, it was late afternoon. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes closed, lips pressed tight, as Fritz's calf's liver aroma made its last stand against the kitchen exhaust. I gave him the report. Cotter was rattled but holding. No tales that I could spot, no disturbances at the apartment yet. Wolfe opened his eyes a sliver. Unsatisfactory but acceptable. He will stay alive for the moment. He'd appreciate the optimism, I said dryly. Wolfe ignored me as usual. He tapped the envelope on his desk with one broad finger. "These figures are not merely irregular, Archie. They are fraudulent. Systematically, deliberately fraudulent. Mr. Vance, if indeed he is the architect, has constructed a labyrinth. But the flaw of a labyrinth is that it requires an entrance and an exit. Talbot found the exit. Therefore he was silenced. Which leaves Cotter holding the lantern," I said. "Precisely." Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes again. "We must determine the circle of complicity. Mr. Vance cannot act alone in matters of such magnitude. There are others, and one of them, perhaps more than one, is desperate enough to kill." I knew what that meant. My evening was about to be booked. So where do I start? "The bank." Wolfe gave a curt nod. "You will make discreet inquiries. Speak to the senior officers, the secretaries, the clerks. Extract their loyalties, their grievances. If Mr. Vance is as ruthless as portrayed, he has left behind a trail of bitterness. Bitterness is fertile ground." I grabbed my coat and hat. And while I'm out, you'll be here sipping beer and contemplating humanity's venality? Wolfe allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Yes, and perhaps a roast squab. I headed out. And by 7 o'clock, I was strolling into the marble cavern that called itself Dominion Bank and Trust. Even after hours, the place exuded money the way a butcher shop exudes sawdust. The lobby was hushed, save for the soft click of heels from a lone woman behind the reception desk. She looked up, young and trim, with the efficient smile of someone paid to discourage questions. "We're closed for the day," she said. "I'm not here to make a deposit," I said, flashing a grin. "Archie Goodwin, private investigator. I'm looking into some internal matters. Maybe you can help me." Her smile faltered just a touch. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. Victor Talbot, senior partner, passed away yesterday, sudden as lightning." I let the words hang. Her eyes flickered just for a moment. "Bingo, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Mr. Talbot's passing was a tragedy. But I can't discuss internal affairs with outsiders. Then you can point me to someone who can. Harold Vance, maybe?" She stiffened. "Mr. Vance doesn't meet with strangers. Not without an appointment." "Then I'll settle for second best," I said. "Who was close to Talbot? Who's crying into their handkerchief today?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Miss Eleanor James. She was his secretary for 15 years. She's in her office upstairs. But please don't say I told you." I tipped my hat. "You're safe with me. You're safe." Finding Eleanor James wasn't hard. Her office was small, tidy, lined with filing cabinets that probably held more truth than the entire boardroom. She was a woman in her 40s, hair pinned neatly, eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that had kept Talbot's world spinning smoothly for a decade and a half. When I introduced myself and mentioned Wolfe, something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or maybe fear. "You shouldn't be here," she said quickly. "They're watching everything." "Who's they?" I asked. Her hands tightened around a stack of papers. "Mr. Vance, the board. They don't want questions. Victor tried to warn them, and now he's—" She cut herself off, swallowing. "Now he's dead," I finished for her. She looked me square in the eye. "Yes, and if you're not careful, you'll be next." I leaned against the filing cabinet, casual as could be. "Lady, that's the 4th time I've heard that in 24 hours. I'm starting to think I should buy a cemetery plot in advance." But she didn't smile. She only whispered, "Be careful who you trust." And just then footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that didn't belong to someone carrying coffee. I straightened, gave her a quick nod and stepped to the door. If Harold Vance wanted to make my acquaintance, it looked like he wasn't going to wait for an appointment. "Would you like me to handle the direct confrontation with Harold Vance next? Or build more tension by having Archie first interact with other suspects, colleagues and board members, before Vance enters the stage?" The footsteps stopped outside the door, and the handle turned without the courtesy of a knock. That was my introduction to Harold Vance. He filled the doorway like a man who owned it, tall, well-built and immaculately groomed, the kind of polish that comes from money, not elbow grease. His hair was dark, with just enough silver at the temples to suggest wisdom instead of age. And his eyes had that peculiar brightness you see in gamblers and politicians, always calculating, always on the hunt for leverage. He didn't bother looking at me first. His eyes went straight to Eleanor James, narrowing. "Miss James," he said in a voice so smooth it was practically buttered, "you seem to have forgotten your hours. It's after closing. Why are you still here?" Eleanor's lips parted, but I stepped in before she could stammer out a defense. "She's here because I asked her to be," I said, leaning back against the filing cabinet. "Archie Goodwin. You must be Harold Vance." That got me his attention. He turned his gaze on me, sharp and appraising. If his eyes had been hands, they'd have rifled my pockets. "Goodwin," he said slowly, as though tasting the word. "Nero Wolfe's man. That explains the intrusion." He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with deliberate finality. "I wouldn't call it an intrusion," I said lightly, more of a friendly visit. "Talbot's death raises questions, and I'm in the business of collecting answers." Vance gave a short, humorless chuckle. "Mr. Talbot's passing was tragic but natural. Heart failure. Nothing more." He adjusted his cufflinks, a small gesture but calculated as if to remind me of the silver gleam at his wrists. "And certainly nothing to require the involvement of Nero Wolfe." "Funny," I said, "but when I talked to Cotter this morning, he seemed to think otherwise." That landed. Just a flicker, nothing more, but enough to register. The corner of his mouth tightened before he smoothed it over with a smile. Henry Carter has always been impressionable. A weak man. I regret that his grief is making him irrational. Eleanor stirred in her chair, but one sharp glance from Vance froze her like a statue. He had control over her, that much was obvious, though whether it was loyalty, fear, or both I couldn't tell yet. I pushed off the cabinet and took a step closer. Carter says Talbot had evidence, proof of something rotten in your vaults, and that he was silenced for it. Now, I don't mean to be rude, Mr. Vance, but the way you walked in here without knocking, like you owned the place, doesn't exactly scream innocence. His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. I do own the place, Goodwin. Dominion Bank is my responsibility. Its survival, its reputation, and yes, its secrets. I won't have it smeared by wild accusations from a grieving subordinate or his hired mouthpiece. I shrugged. You can call me what you like, but Wolfe doesn't chase shadows. If he's involved, there's a fire under all that smoke. Vance stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated. His voice dropped, intimate and dangerous. Tell your employer this. Meddling in Dominion's affairs will end badly. For Carter, for anyone who listens to him, and perhaps even for you. That was the kind of threat I usually file under Exhibit A, but I didn't flinch. I leaned in just enough to match his stare. I'll be sure to pass along your regards. We stood like that for a long moment, the air thick as a poker room before the flop. Then he turned, sharp and sudden, to Eleanor. Miss James, you will remember your place. This conversation never happened. Without waiting for a reply, he opened the door and walked out, his footsteps receding with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. Eleanor sagged in her chair once he was gone, her shoulders trembling. You shouldn't have provoked him, she whispered. Lady, I said, adjusting my tie, provoking him was the point. Now I know what kind of man he is. And so does Wolfe. She looked up at me, fear still shadowing her eyes. Be careful, Mr. Goodwin. Mr. Vance doesn't bluff. If he feels threatened, he eliminates the threat. I gave her my best grin, the one that's gotten me through more scrapes than a bulletproof vest. That makes two of us. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was working on his second bottle of beer and a plate of something Fritz had dressed with enough herbs to supply a monastery. He listened to my report in silence, eyes closed, head tilted back like a man enjoying a symphony only he could hear. When I finished, he opened his eyes and steepled his fingers. Vance, he said thoughtfully. Arrogant, proprietary, dismissive. A man accustomed to wielding power without resistance. Such men are dangerous not because they are intelligent, but because they believe themselves invulnerable. A fallacy, of course. Of course, I echoed. But a fallacy with deep pockets and sharp teeth. Indeed. He tapped the envelope again. The fraud is plain. The culprits are not yet. Talbot knew. Carter suspects. Vance threatens. We must complete the circle. You want me to round up the rest of the board? Not yet. Begin with those closest to Talbot. His secretary, Miss James, you have spoken with her. She is frightened, which is natural, but also loyal. Loyalty may be directed or misdirected. Determine which. Then speak with the junior officers. They will know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically if not literally. I stretched, already tired at the thought of another round of interviews. And while I'm playing roving reporter, you'll sit here and let your brain do the heavy lifting. Precisely, he said, closing his eyes again. Archie, the world is divided between those who labor with their hands and those who labor with their minds. You should be grateful that I allow you to do both. I muttered something about labor laws under my breath. But he was already gone, back into the silence of thought. The next morning, I was back at Dominion Bank. Armed with charm, curiosity, and Wolfe's reputation, I made the rounds quietly, speaking to clerks and junior officers, the kind of people who see everything but get asked nothing. They were nervous, evasive, and a little too quick to insist that Talbot's death was natural. One slip, though, one whispered word about discrepancies in accounts Talbot had been reviewing, was enough to tell me the rot ran deeper than Carter knew. By noon, I had 3 names on my list. Walter Briggs, the senior accountant with a nervous tic and ink-stained fingers. Julia Ansell, a vice president who smiled too quickly and spoke too little. And Howard Klein, a board member known for his philanthropy, but rumored to gamble in sums that would sink a small country. Each had ties to Talbot. Each had reason to fear what he'd uncovered. I walked out into the sunlight, with those names written in my notebook and Wolfe's voice echoing in my head. Complete the circle. And I knew one thing for sure. Harold Vance might be the spider at the center of the web, but these three were strands in the silk. If I tugged the right one, the whole structure might tremble. Now it was a matter of choosing which thread to pull first. Would you like me to continue with Archie's first round of suspect interviews, Briggs, Julia Ansell and Klein to widen the circle, or build more suspense by showing Wolfe's reaction as the suspects begin to enter his orbit? When you're trying to untangle a knot like this, you don't just yank at it and hope it comes loose. You work it thread by thread, and you keep your fingers steady. Wolfe would have preferred I brought the whole mess back to him intact, but someone had to get their hands dirty, and that someone, as usual, was yours truly. I decided to start with Walter Briggs. Accountants may not look like much, but they keep the ledgers breathing. And if Talbot had sniffed out fraud, odds were Briggs had at least smelled the smoke. Dominion Bank's accounting offices were buried in the building's third floor, a rabbit warren of desks, adding machines and clerks scribbling numbers with the resigned patience of monks copying scripture. Briggs had a cubicle tucked in the corner, stacked with files high enough to double as barricades. He looked up when I approached, a thin, nervous man with watery eyes and a forehead that seemed to slope right into his receding hairline. His tie was crooked, his hands ink-stained, and his eyes darted toward the doorway as though Harold Vance might materialize at any second. "Mr. Briggs?" I asked pleasantly. "Yes? Hi, do I know you?" "Archie Goodwin, Private Investigations. I'm looking into Victor Talbot's death." That got him flustered fast. He pushed his chair back so abruptly it squeaked. I don't know anything about that." "Heart failure." "That's all it was." "Sure," I said easily. "Heart failure that left bruises on the throat." "That happens all the time." He blanched, his lips working like he wanted to argue but couldn't summon the words. Finally he whispered, "You shouldn't say things like that here. Someone might hear you." "That's the idea," I said. "Look, Briggs, I don't care about protecting reputations. What I care about is who had the most to lose if Talbot spilled the beans. And from where I'm standing, that means someone in your department. You work the numbers. What did Talbot see that he wasn't supposed to?" Briggs swallowed hard, sweat prickling on his temple. I can't say. If Vance finds out I talked, then don't think of it as talking. Think of it as self-preservation. Talbot's gone. Carter's next. You think Vance stops there? He'll clean house until no one's left who knows the truth. That includes you." He trembled, fingers twitching on the edge of a ledger. For a second I thought he'd clam up entirely, but then his shoulders sagged. "Transfers," he muttered. "Large ones, millions, to companies that don't exist. At least not on paper. I checked the addresses, empty offices, fake names. Talbot told me to keep it quiet until he could confront the board. Then he was dead. Did you keep records?" I asked. His eyes darted to the files on his desk. "Copies, hidden, not here." "Good," I said, lowering my voice. "You hang on to those like your life depends on it." "Because it does." Before he could reply, a shadow fell across the cubicle. A junior clerk appeared, dropping off a stack of papers, and Briggs stiffened instantly, the window of honesty slamming shut. I gave him a friendly nod and moved along before suspicion attached itself like a burr. Next on my list was Julia Ansell, Vice President, young for her title but polished to a mirror shine. She had an office 2 floors up, with a view of the city that said she'd made it, and the glass walls to remind everyone else they hadn't. She greeted me with a professional smile that could have been trademarked, her blonde hair in place, her pearl necklace perfectly scented. "Mr. Goodwin, was it?" she said smoothly when I introduced myself. "I was told you were making inquiries. I'm afraid I can't imagine how I can help you." "Neither can I admitted. But I figured I'd ask. You worked closely with Talbot." Her smile flickered. "Of course. Victor was a fine man, a mentor. You've been with the bank how long?" 7 years, she said crisply. "I was promoted quickly, thanks in no small part to Victor's guidance, and Harold Vance." Her eyes cooled instantly, the warmth gone like someone turned off a switch. "Mr. Vance is the president. He has my full support," I chuckled. That sounded rehearsed. "I'd almost think you were afraid of him." Her jaw tightened, though her smile stayed fixed. I'm not afraid of Mr. Vance. I'm loyal. There's a difference. I'll take your word for it, I said, though I didn't. But answer me this. Did Talbot confide in you before he died? Say anything about finding something he shouldn't have? She hesitated. Just a second, but long enough. No, she said finally, too quickly. Victor was private about his work. Funny, everyone tells me he was a mentor, but no one seems to know what he was working on. That's some mentorship. Her eyes narrowed and her voice took on steel. Mr. Goodwin, you should be careful. Dominion Bank has survived for over a century because it protects its own. Outsiders don't fare well when they interfere. That's the second threat I've had in 24 hours, I said lightly. Keep it up and I'll start a scrapbook. Her smile didn't budge. Then you'd better prepare extra pages. I left her office with the sense that Julia Ansell was more than a loyal executive. She was invested. Whether in Vance, the fraud, or just the survival of her career, I wasn't sure yet. But she knew something. And she wasn't planning to share it. That left Howard Klein, the philanthropist with a taste for high-stakes gambling. He had a reputation for generosity that shone in the papers and whispers about debts that shadowed him in back rooms. I found him in a paneled boardroom, cigar smoke curling around him like a stage prop. He was a portly man with ruddy cheeks, his laugh booming loud enough to rattle the glass. Though it died the second he saw me. Goodwin, he said warily, I heard you were poking around. News travels fast in this place, I said. I was hoping to get your perspective. Victor Talbot was a friend, Klein interrupted quickly. Too quickly. A dear friend. His death was devastating. Sure, I said. So devastating you've already got his seat warmed. His cheeks reddened. That's a vile suggestion. Relax, I'm not here to smear reputations. Just to find out who wanted Talbot gone. You've got a lot on the line, Klein. Debt can do strange things to a man. His eyes hardened. If you're insinuating I would harm Victor, I'm not insinuating, I cut in. I'm asking, did you know about the transfers? The shell companies? The money that went missing? He paled, his bluster cracking. I don't know anything about that. Maybe not, I said, watching him sweat. But maybe you heard Talbot talk about it. Maybe you knew he was planning to bring it up to the board. And maybe that scared you. His cigar trembled in his fingers. You don't understand. If Dominion falls, we all fall. My charities, my reputation, everything. Victor should have kept quiet. He didn't understand what he was playing with. I leaned closer. Then maybe you can explain it to me. Because if Victor was silenced, someone had a very good reason. He shook his head furiously. No more questions. Get out. I left him there, puffing furiously on his cigar, the smoke thick enough to choke the truth. But I had enough to bring back to Wolfe. 3 suspects, 3 motives, and 3 sets of nerves frayed to snapping. By the time I walked into the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, a fresh beer sweating on the stand. He looked at me without speaking, as I laid out what I'd found. Briggs with his hidden records, Ansell with her too-polished loyalty, Klein with his debts and desperation. Wolfe listened, eyes closed, tapping one finger against the armrest, the rhythm steady, thoughtful. When I finished, he opened his eyes and said, Satisfactory. The circle is nearly complete. They are bound together, Archie. Fear, ambition, necessity. Talbot threatened them all. But one among them crossed the line into murder. Any idea which? I asked. Wolfe's lips curved slightly. I have an idea, but ideas are not proof. Proof requires pressure. We must invite them into the arena and observe who sweats. I grinned. So you want me to send out invitations? Not yet, Wolfe said, lifting his glass. First, something has been disturbed. I feel it. Check the safe, Archie. Now. I frowned, moved to the wall safe behind Wolfe's desk, spun the dial and pulled it open. The envelope was gone, and that was when I realized Wolfe hadn't been speculating. He'd been waiting. Would you like me to continue directly with the subtle trespass, the disappearance of the evidence from Wolfe's safe, and show how Wolfe maneuvers to regain control? The safe door gaped like a toothless mouth, and my gut dropped with it. I'd put that envelope in myself, locked, spun, double-checked the whole drill, and yet the thing sat empty, mocking me. I turned to Wolfe, who hadn't budged an inch. He regarded me with the mild expression of a man who had just confirmed something he'd expected all along. Well? He asked. It's gone, I said flatly. Yes. Yes? I snapped. You knew? I suspected. His tone was dry as old parchment. I had reason to believe we were being observed. and that our sanctuary had been compromised. The missing envelope confirms it. I shut the safe with a little more force than necessary. If someone got in here, it wasn't by knocking politely. You're telling me someone waltzed into this house, past Fritz, past me, past you, and took it? Not waltzed, Wolfe corrected. Slipped. Unseen or aided. He closed his eyes. The familiar gesture that always meant his mind was tightening its grip on something invisible. A trespass, Archie, but not merely physical, psychological. Someone wished to demonstrate that even here, within these walls, we are vulnerable. That envelope was our only proof, I reminded him, maybe a shade more hotly than I should. Without it, we're back to square one. Carter's word against Vance's smile. Wolfe's lips twitched. Proof is ephemeral. Knowledge is not. You examined those documents. I examined them. Between us, they cannot vanish. Sure, I said, but judges and juries don't take testimony from memory. We need hard copies. We shall reacquire them, Wolfe said with unshakable calm. Mr. Briggs, for example, has copies hidden. He admitted as much to you. That avenue remains open. I rubbed my jaw. Assuming Briggs isn't next on the hit list. Precisely why time is of the essence, Wolfe replied. He opened his eyes now, sharp and clear. Archie, listen well. Whoever took the envelope did so not for the knowledge it contained. They already possess that. But to deprive us of leverage. This is an act of pressure. We must respond by applying greater pressure in return. And how do you suggest we do that? By widening the circle. Invite our suspects into proximity. Observe who trembles, who blusters, who overplays. The guilty cannot help themselves. Their nerves betray them, I sighed. So you want me to herd the lambs to the slaughter? Briggs, Ansell, Klein, and Vance? Wolfe shook his head. Not yet. Mr. Vance is too fortified, too sure of himself. We require his underlings to fray first. They will reveal fissures in his fortress. Once those cracks appear, we can direct our assault at the keystone. I started pacing. All right, but one thing bothers me. How did someone get in here? Fritz doesn't exactly snooze on the job, and you'd notice if a fly landed on your beer. That leaves me. And unless I've taken up sleepwalking thievery, the breach came from outside, which means someone was watching, waiting, and knew exactly when to strike. Yes, Wolfe agreed. And that, Archie, is more dangerous than the loss itself. They are bold enough to enter this house. They believe themselves untouchable. I didn't like the sound of that one bit. The brownstone was sacred ground. Wolfe's temple, fortress, and prison all rolled into one. If that could be violated, then nothing about this case was ordinary. Fine, I said. I'll track down Briggs first. If he's still breathing, we'll pry those records out of him before Vance decides to tidy up loose ends. The next morning I set out early, more out of stubbornness than eagerness. Dominion Bank was crawling with tension by now. You could feel it in the way clerks kept their voices low, in the way the guard by the elevator eyed everyone like they might be carrying dynamite. Briggs wasn't at his desk. His chair sat empty, a stack of ledgers neatly aligned as though he'd never been there at all. That made my stomach twist. I asked one of the clerks where he was, and she whispered, "Called in sick." First time in years that was enough to put me in motion. I got his address from the employee directory, something they keep handy for exactly the kind of emergencies they pretend don't happen. Briggs lived in a modest walk-up a few blocks from the bank, and when I knocked on his door, no answer came. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Then I heard it. A faint rustle inside, a quick shuffle like someone retreating. I leaned in, voice steady. "Briggs, it's Goodwin. I'm not here to hurt you. Open the door before I fetch a locksmith." A pause, then the door opened a crack, the chain still fastened. Briggs's face appeared, pale, eyes darting like a rabbit's. "Go away," he hissed. "Not a chance," I said. "You called in sick because you're scared out of your skin. I don't blame you. But hiding in your apartment won't stop Vance if he's got you marked. Let me in." Another long pause, then the chain slid back and the door opened. Briggs stepped aside, trembling. His place was small, cluttered with stacks of papers and an overflowing ashtray. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "They know," he whispered the moment I was inside. "They know I kept copies. I saw a man watching from across the street last night. If I talk, I'm dead." "Newsflash," I said, closing the door behind me. "If you don't talk, you're still dead. At least with me, you've got Wolfe behind you. And believe me, you want him on your side." His lips trembled. "I have the files, hidden." "Good, then we'll take them, and you'll come back with me. You'll be safe at the brownstone." He shook his head violently. No, nowhere is safe. They'll find me. Just like they found Talbot. Just like they got into your house. That stopped me cold. How do you know about that? Briggs blinked, confused. I heard. People talk. Word spreads. Too fast. Too rehearsed. I studied him closer, suspicion curling at the edges. Was he just terrified or was he playing a part? Wolfe would know in a heartbeat. My job was to get him there in one piece. Him there. Fine, I said. Get the files now. He shuffled into the bedroom and returned with a battered manila folder. His hands shook as he passed it to me. This is everything. If they catch me without it, maybe they'll let me live. Don't count on it, I muttered, tucking the folder under my arm. Come on. You're sticking with me until Wolfe decides what to do. He hesitated, then nodded weakly. We slipped out into the street, his eyes darting to every shadow, every passing car. I kept my hand close to my pocket, where my revolver waited, and scanned the sidewalks. Nothing obvious, but the air had that charged feeling, like lightning about to strike. When we reached the brownstone, Fritz looked at Briggs with mild distaste, as though he'd brought dirt into the house. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, eyes closed until I laid the folder on his desk. He opened them then, studying Briggs with the same look he reserved for suspicious mushrooms. Mr. Briggs, Wolfe said, his voice heavy with disapproval. You have placed yourself in a most ignoble position. Briggs wrung his hands. I didn't want. Spare me, Wolfe cut him off. You will sit. You will answer questions. And you will not waste my time with tremors and protestations. Archie beer, I fetched it, though my eyes stayed on Briggs. He looked like a man about to crack down the middle. Wolfe studied him in silence for a long moment, then finally said, You are lying to me. Not about the fraud, that much is evident, but about your role in it, and about your knowledge of the trespass here. Briggs's eyes widened. I swear I don't. Wolfe lifted a finger. Silence. I do not tolerate perjury in my own house. You will speak truthfully or you will be discarded. Choose. Briggs swallowed hard, sweat gleaming on his forehead. His eyes darted to me, desperate, pleading. And that was when the phone rang, shrill and sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. Fritz appeared from the hall. Mr. Goodwin, it is for you. I crossed to the phone, picked it up, and heard Cotter's voice, thin and trembling. Archie, it's happened. They've found me. I don't know how long I have. The line went dead. I stood frozen for half a second, the receiver heavy in my hand, Wolfe's gaze already on me. His expression was calm, but his eyes were burning. Archie, he said softly, go now. And just like that, the circle was closing faster than either of us had planned. I was out the door before Wolfe's words finished vibrating in the air, the revolver heavy in my pocket, and my pulse pounding like it was on a stopwatch. Cotter's voice on the line had been ragged, the kind you only hear when someone's about to fold under pressure he can't withstand. The cab I flagged nearly took the bumper off a truck on Lexington, and I didn't even flinch. I was too busy replaying his last words. They found me. By the time we pulled up in front of Cotter's building, the doorman was missing from his post, which was wrong enough to sour my stomach. The lobby was empty, the elevator doors standing open like a mouth waiting to swallow. I took the stairs instead, habit, and by the third flight I could hear voices echoing faintly above me. Angry, low, the kind of tones you don't use in polite society. I slowed, moving quiet, and reached Cotter's floor. His door was ajar, just a crack, and through it came the sound of something shattering, a glass maybe, and Cotter's voice sharp with fear. I don't have them. I gave them to someone. You'll never. That was followed by the heavy thump of a fist hitting flesh. I didn't wait. I shoved the door wide and stepped in, revolver drawn. The scene froze for a split second. Cotter was slumped against his sofa, his lips split and one eye swelling. Towering over him were two men, both cut from the same cloth. Dark suits, hard eyes, the kind of professional silence that says they don't ask why, just who. One of them turned toward me, his hand already dipping inside his jacket. Don't, I said, the revolver leveled at his chest. My voice carried more steel than I felt, but sometimes bluffing is half the battle. Hands where I can see them. The two men looked at each other, a flicker of hesitation passing between them. They hadn't counted on company. You're making a mistake, one of them growled. Story of my life, I shot back. Now step away from him. They did, slow and deliberate. Cotter sagged forward, clutching his side, gasping for air. Guy kept my revolver steady. But my brain was running ahead, weighing the odds. 2 on 1. And my ace was surprise, which was already spent. If they decided to rush me, I'd get one maybe, before the other snapped me in half, so I played it cool. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You two are going to leave nice and quiet, without making me redecorate this apartment in red. You tell your boss, whoever he is, that Cotter's under protection. Nero Wolfe's protection. That's a kind of insurance you can't buy. The mention of Wolfe's name landed like a pebble in still water, ripples spreading across their faces. They weren't scared, not exactly, but they knew enough to take it seriously. Wolfe's reputation was like a loaded gun. It didn't need to fire often to keep people wary. The taller one sneered. You think Wolfe scares us? No, I said, but the cops finding you here with your hands on a banker's throat might. Your choice. They hesitated a beat longer, then made their decision. Without another word, they backed toward the door, keeping their eyes on me, then slipped out into the hall. I followed them far enough to make sure they were really gone, then shut the door and bolted it. Cotter groaned, trying to sit up. God, they were going to kill me. Yeah, I said, holstering the revolver. And they'll be back. You just jumped from nervous client to active target. I crouched beside him, checking the damage. A split lip, bruised ribs, but nothing fatal yet. You're moving in with Wolfe tonight. End of discussion. His eyes widened. But they got into his house already. You said Wolfe's house isn't a hotel. Once he knows someone's breached it, he locks it tighter than Fort Knox. You'll be safer there than anywhere else in this city. Cotter hesitated, then nodded weakly, too shaken to argue. I got him on his feet, draped his coat over his shoulders, and half walked, half carried him downstairs. The doorman had reappeared by then, looking sheepish, but one look from me froze him solid. He opened the cab door without a word. The ride back to the brownstone was tense. Cotter kept darting glances out the window, expecting shadows to peel off the sidewalk and finish the job. I kept one hand near my revolver and the other ready to shove him flat if a car backfired. Nothing happened, though, and by the time we pulled up, the silence felt heavier than a gunshot would have. Inside, Wolfe was waiting, as though he'd known down to the minute when we'd arrive. Fritz had a basin ready, and between the two of us, we got Cotter patched up enough to resemble a human being again. Then Wolfe fixed him with that gaze of his, the one that makes men confess sins they didn't know they'd committed. Mr. Cotter, Wolfe said, his tone deceptively gentle. You are now both bait and witness. That is a precarious position. If you wish to survive, you will do precisely as I say. Cotter nodded vigorously, wincing at the pain in his lip. Good. Then you will remain here, under our watch. You will not attempt to flee, nor to contact anyone. The fewer variables, the better. Do you understand? Yes, Cotter whispered. Wolfe leaned back, folding his hands across his stomach. Excellent. Archie, you have performed adequately. Our adversary has revealed himself as impatient. That is to our advantage. He will strike again sooner, not later. I frowned. I'd rather not wait for him to make another house call. We shan't, Wolfe replied. His eyes flickered toward Briggs, still huddled in the corner like a man who'd seen his own coffin. We now have duplicates of the records. Mr. Briggs, you will remain as well. Together, you and Mr. Cotter represent the fulcrum of this matter. Whoever controls you controls the outcome. That gentleman makes you indispensable to me. Briggs swallowed hard but nodded. Cotter closed his eyes, too tired to protest. I leaned against the desk, arms folded. So what's the next move? We've got 2 witnesses, half a dozen suspects, and no envelope. The enemy already knows we're in the game. What's our play? Wolfe's eyes glinted, a rare spark of satisfaction. Pressure, Archie. We summon our suspects here, one by one, then together. We let them feel the walls closing in. And in their discomfort, they will betray themselves. By word, by gesture, by silence, I knew what that meant. The famous office gathering, Wolfe's gladiatorial arena. I'd seen it a dozen times and knew it worked, but this time felt different. The trespass, the attack on Cotter, the missing envelope. Our opponents weren't playing for money or reputation anymore. They were playing for survival, and that made them dangerous in a way I wasn't sure even Wolfe fully appreciated. Fine, I said. I'll deliver the invitations. But don't be surprised if 1 or 2 of them decide to RSVP with a bullet. Wolfe closed his eyes, already reaching for his beer. Then they will find I am not easily dislodged. Humanity is vulgar, Archie, but it is predictable. And predictability is the one weakness I exploit without mercy. Cotter stirred on the sofa, his bruised face pale. What if they kill me before you can expose them? Wolfe's eyes opened, steady and cold. Then, sir, you will have died for something marginally worthwhile. But I assure you, I have no intention of wasting my dinner on sentiment. You will live. Cotter didn't look reassured, but I'd seen that gleam in Wolfe's eyes before. And I knew one thing. Whoever thought they could break into our safe and rough up our client was about to find out that Nero Wolfe's house might bend. But it never breaks. And as I lit a cigarette and looked at Briggs and Cotter huddled in their corners, I realized something else. The storm wasn't outside anymore. It was here in Wolfe's office gathering strength. And when the suspects arrived, it would break wide open. It took me most of the next day to line up Wolfe's little parade. These weren't the kind of folks who came running when you rang a bell. They were bankers and board members, the sort of people who usually sent secretaries to refuse your call. But Wolfe's name carries a weight all its own, and once I hinted that refusing an invitation might be taken as guilt, they all agreed. Some more gracefully than others. Briggs didn't have a choice. He was already holed up with us. Cotter, battered and jittery, was more spectator than participant. The others, Julia Ansell, Howard Klein, and finally Harold Vance, were scheduled like pieces on a chessboard, each to arrive within minutes of the other, until the room was full and Wolfe's stage set. By early evening, Fritz had the chairs arranged in Wolfe's office, the great globe-like lamps burning warmly, the air heavy with Wolfe's orchids drifting down from the plant rooms upstairs. The room looked deceptively calm, but I knew better. This wasn't comfort. It was an arena padded in leather and polished wood. Julia Ansell arrived first, gliding in with the kind of poise that could cut glass. She acknowledged me with a flicker of a smile and settled into her chair as if she were preparing for a board meeting. A moment later came Klein, red-faced and puffing, his cigar stub smouldering in his fingers despite my pointed look toward the wastebasket. He ignored me and sank into a chair with all the grace of a sack of flour. Briggs was already sweating through his collar in a corner, darting glances at both of them, like a man caught between firing squads. And then came Vance. He was the only one who didn't try to mask his mood. He walked in tall, proud, with the faint curl of contempt on his lips, as though Wolfe's office were a courtroom he already owned. He shook no hands, gave no nods, and when I directed him to a chair, he sat down like it was a throne. Wolfe hadn't spoken a word yet. He sat in his chair immovable, eyes half-lidded, the curve of his mouth unreadable. When the room was quiet, he finally opened them fully and let his gaze move from one face to another, slow as molasses but sharp enough to draw blood. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and resonant, "you are here because the death of Victor Talbot was not, as you have been told, an accident of nature. He was murdered, and his murder was motivated by fraud, a fraud within Dominion Bank. There was a collective stir, though each played it differently." Julia stiffened, her hands tightening in her lap. Klein's cigar froze halfway to his lips. Briggs nearly choked on air, and Vance. Vance smiled, cold and thin. "This is outrageous," Julia said quickly. "You can't—" "Miss Ansell," Wolfe cut her off, his voice mild but final. "I can and I have. Mr. Goodwin and I have examined the records Mr. Talbot uncovered. They reveal a pattern of transfers, millions of dollars siphoned into companies that exist only on paper. The architect of this fraud is among you." "Preposterous," Vance said smoothly. "You have no proof." Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. "On the contrary, proof abounds. Mr. Briggs has safeguarded duplicates. Mr. Cotter delivered them to me before your agents attempted to silence him. Their very survival condemns you." Briggs gave a strangled sound, half protest, half confession. Klein's forehead gleamed with sweat, and Julia's eyes darted once, involuntarily. Toward Vance, that flicker was all Wolfe needed. "You see," Wolfe continued, "Talbot had already pieced together enough to confront you. Mr. Vance, you killed him to preserve your dominion. Yet you were not alone. A scheme of this magnitude requires accomplices. Miss Ansell, you aided him, smoothing figures, silencing whispers, hoping your loyalty would buy you security. Mr. Klein, your debts made you pliant. The fraud sustained your illusions of generosity. And Mr. Briggs," Wolfe's eyes pinned him like a moth, "you did the dirty work with the numbers. Without you, the fraud could not have been executed." Briggs broke first. His voice cracked high and panicked. I didn't want to. He forced me. Vance threatened to ruin me if I didn't comply. So I only— Enough, Wolfe said sharply, his tone a gavel striking. Your protestations are irrelevant. You all participated, whether through greed, cowardice, or ambition. But only one of you silenced Talbot. Only one of you entered my house and violated my safe. That individual is— He paused, letting the silence stretch taut, the room shrinking around us. Vance leaned forward, his smile widening. Go on, Wolfe, accuse me. Say how far you get. Wolfe's eyes glowed with quiet triumph. It was not you, Mr. Vance. Your arrogance blinds you, but murder requires panic, not pride. No, the trespasser and the killer was someone else. Someone clever enough to hide behind your shadow, yet desperate enough to act alone. Every head turned, as though compelled toward Julia Ansell, her face drained of color. That's ridiculous. You killed him, Wolfe said, his voice calm, inexorable. You saw that Talbot intended to expose the fraud. You feared Vance would sacrifice you first to protect himself. So you struck. You strangled Talbot, arranging his body to mimic collapse. Then, when Cotter brought me the records, you slipped into this house to erase them. You failed because knowledge, once seen, cannot be erased. Julia's eyes flashed, her composure fracturing. That's a lie. You can't prove— Proof. Wolfe raised one brow. The proof is in your eyes, your posture, your silence until pressed. It is in the faint scent of gardenia you left in my office, when no one else here wears it. And it is in the very simplicity of your motive, survival. The others could wait, confident in Vance's protection. You could not. So you acted. The room erupted, Klein cursing, Briggs gasping, Cotter moaning into his handkerchief. Julia stood trembling, her mask shattered. He was going to ruin us all, she hissed. I only wanted time to fix it before it all collapsed. By killing him? I said sharply. Her eyes snapped to me, wild and furious. Better him than me. That was the end of her composure. She sagged back into her chair, shaking. The fight drained out. Vance sat frozen, the smug curve of his lips gone, replaced by something harder, colder, calculating how quickly he could cut her loose before she dragged him down too. Wolfe exhaled slowly, the tension in the room bending toward him like a tide. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. He will find Miss Ansell's confession adequate, though circumstantial. Combined with Mr. Briggs's records and Mr. Cotter's testimony, it will suffice. I nodded, already reaching for the phone. But as I dialed, I kept one eye on Vance. He wasn't broken, not yet. His empire was wounded, but men like him don't topple with one push. Wolfe knew it too. His gaze lingered on Vance a moment longer, sharp with unfinished business. Julia was the murderer. But Harold Vance was still the spider in the web. And the web wasn't done shaking. Kramer arrived 20 minutes later, smelling of cigar smoke and city grime, his hat pushed back, and his eyes carrying that permanent squint that meant he didn't trust anyone, least of all Wolfe. He listened while I laid out the story in broad strokes, Wolfe filling in the details with his usual economy. Julia Ansell sat rigid, lips pressed together. Her earlier fury now cooled into a brittle silence. Briggs looked like he was about to faint. Klein clung to his cigar like it was a lifeline, and Vance wore the same expression a cat does when it's been caught in the parlor, but knows the dog will get blamed. Kramer gave me a look that said he didn't buy half of it, then turned on Wolfe. You're telling me this woman strangled Talbot, made it look like natural causes, and then broke into your house to steal evidence? All on her own. That's neat, Wolfe, too neat. Wolfe tilted his head, unperturbed. Neatness is the virtue of logic, Inspector. Miss Ansell had motive, means, and opportunity. Her own words betray her. She acted in fear to preserve herself when she believed Mr. Vance would discard her. Julia snapped then, unable to hold her tongue. I was protecting the bank. If Talbot had exposed us, it would have collapsed everything we built. She bit the words back too late. Kramer seized on it, pouncing like a terrier. So you admit you were in on the fraud? Her shoulders sagged. Enough, Wolfe said, his voice suddenly sharp. Inspector, if you wish to parade her into a cell, do so. But I caution you, if you stop there, you will fail. Miss Ansell is guilty of murder, yes, but the fraud she sought to conceal remains. That fraud is not her design. It belongs to Mr. Vance. The room tilted at that, all eyes swinging to Vance. He didn't flinch. His smile faint but steady, was that of a man who expected this move and already had the counter prepared. "You'll have a hard time proving that, Wolfe," Vance said calmly. "Fraud requires paper trails, signatures, undeniable links. You don't have them. All you have is a frightened accountant and a broken woman willing to confess to anything to save herself." He looked at Kramer then, his tone almost patronizing. "Inspector, I trust you see the danger in relying on the word of liars," Kramer scowled, chewing on his cigar. He hated being played, and Vance was playing him with silk gloves. I couldn't stand it. "You think you're clever, Vance, but Wolfe doesn't point a finger unless the ground under it is solid. You may not have touched Talbot, but you pulled the strings. And if Julia hadn't cracked, you'd have let her take the whole fall." Vance's eyes slid to me, amused. "And yet, Mr. Goodwin, when the dust settles, I'll still be president of Dominion Bank. Untouchable." Wolfe's eyes snapped open, his voice cold and cutting. "Untouchable only until the public is touched, Mr. Vance. Fraud thrives in darkness. But our daylight is merciless. Mr. Goodwin, bring Mr. Briggs forward." Briggs stumbled to his feet, trembling. Wolfe gestured to the folder we'd taken from him. "These records, Inspector, contain the transfers. Amounts, dates, false corporations. I have verified their veracity. Present them to the district attorney. The fraud is undeniable. And Vance, as president, bears ultimate responsibility." Vance chuckled. "Responsibility is not guilt, Wolfe. You'll find the signatures are not mine. The accounts were managed by subordinates. Miss Ansell, perhaps, or Mr. Briggs, or even poor Mr. Talbot himself before his tragic death. You can shuffle papers all day, but nothing ties them to me." It was brazen, and it was almost convincing. I glanced at Kramer, who was frowning hard, wrestling between Wolfe's certainty and Vance's slippery defense. Wolfe leaned forward now, every ounce of his bulk radiating authority. "You are correct, Vance. Your signature is absent. But the absence itself condemns you. Every fraudulent transfer was carefully insulated, approved by others, never by you. Too clean, too deliberate. A man truly innocent would appear at least once, even peripherally. Your total absence proves design. You're the architect, not the pawn." For the first time, Vance's smile faltered. "Just a hair, but enough." Wolfe pressed on, relentless. "Miss Ansell killed to preserve herself, yes, but she was driven by your shadow. Briggs cooked the books at your command. Klein accepted your lifeline to cover his debts. Cotter remained silent out of fear. You orchestrated them all. That is the true crime, and one for which even you cannot hide." The silence after that was heavy. Julia stared at the floor, her hands trembling. Briggs nodded frantically, his eyes wide. Klein swore under his breath, his cigar finally extinguished. Kramer let out a long exhale, shaking his head. "Damn you, Wolfe, you've boxed me in again. I can take Ansell in for murder tonight, no problem. But if I go after Vance without every duck in a row, he'll walk out smiling and sue the city for slander." Wolfe inclined his head. "Then build carefully, Inspector. You have the records, the witnesses, the connections. The murder alone will not topple Dominion Bank, but fraud will. And when fraud is proven, Vance will fall with it. Vance will fall with it." Kramer jabbed a finger at Vance. "Don't think you're walking away clean. I'll have men on you day and night. One slip, one loose thread, and I'll yank it until the whole suit unravels." Vance stood, straightening his cuffs with deliberate calm. "Do as you like, Inspector. I'll be in my office tomorrow morning, as always. Dominion endures." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Julia followed under guard, her face pale as marble, while Klein and Briggs lingered awkwardly until I showed them the door. When it was finally just Wolfe, Cotter and me, the office felt strangely quiet, as if the air itself had exhaled. Cotter sat hunched, still trembling. "So, it's over?" he asked weakly. "No," Wolfe said, his voice firm. "Miss Ansell will answer for Talbot's death, but Dominion's rot remains. Vance still presides. Until he is stripped of his dominion, it is not over." I lit a cigarette, letting the smoke curl toward the ceiling. Kramer'll gnaw on Vance until he draws blood. The papers will eat it up once word leaks. Might take time, but he'll go down. "Perhaps," Wolfe murmured. "Or perhaps not. Men like Vance survive, because others lack the stomach to excise them fully. They prefer to prune the branches rather than uproot the tree. But I'm not a gardener, Archie. I am a man who demands order, and this order is incomplete." That was Wolfe's version of a vow, and I knew better than to argue. Carter sagged deeper into his chair. Relief and dread tangled in equal measure. For him, survival was enough. For Wolfe, survival was never the point. Dinner that night was lamb with rosemary, Fritz's quiet way of restoring balance. Wolfe ate in silence, brooding, his mind chewing on something heavier than the meat. I let him be. Some men chase criminals through alleys. Wolfe hunts them in silence, with logic sharper than any knife, and as I sat across from him, sipping my wine, I knew this wasn't finished. Julia Ansell had been exposed as the killer, yes, but Harold Vance, untouched, unrepentant, still cast his shadow across the whole affair. Wolfe had set the trap, sprung it, and caught one predator. But the spider was still in the web. And Wolfe never let a spider sit unchallenged. The following evening brought rain, the slow, steady kind that makes the city smell like iron and old stone. Cotter was still holed up in the brownstone, hovering like a man afraid to breathe too loudly. Briggs had scuttled back to his apartment under police watch, while Julia Ansell sat in a cell downtown. That left Harold Vance free, which didn't sit well with me or Wolfe, especially Wolfe. He hated unfinished business the way he hated exercise. I found him in his chair after dinner, a half-drained glass of beer at his elbow, and his lips pursed like he'd swallowed a lemon. He'd been silent all evening, which meant his mind was balancing on some precipice I couldn't see. Finally he spoke. "Archie, telephone Inspector Kramer. Tell him to arrive at 9. Bring Mr. Vance with him." I raised an eyebrow. "Vance already slipped the noose once. You think he'll walk back in here just because Kramer holds the leash?" "He will," Wolfe said simply. Pride is his undoing. He believes himself untouchable. That is his fatal error, and as usual Wolfe was right. At 9 sharp the doorbell rang. Fritz admitted Kramer, dripping rain, followed by Vance in his immaculate suit. He still wore that thin smile, though now it looked stretched, the edges fraying. He sat without invitation, while Kramer growled about being dragged out in weather better suited to ducks. Wolfe regarded Vance with heavy-lidded eyes. "Mr. Vance, your stratagem is impressive. You erected a fraud so carefully layered that guilt diffused among many, leaving you in apparent innocence. But in your perfection lies your undoing." Vance leaned back, amused. "You've already accused me once, Wolfe, and it didn't stick. What new fantasy have you concocted?" Wolfe ignored the barb. "Every fraudulent transfer avoided your signature. Every approval was by subordinates. Too careful, too consistent. But last night I re-examined the records. In one set, a clerical note appears, an adjustment logged in handwriting, not type. It is yours," I blinked. "Wolfe hadn't mentioned that to me," Vance scoffed. "You expect me to believe you can identify my handwriting?" "No," Wolfe said smoothly. "But Mr. Briggs can. He has worked under you for years." "And he already has." Kramer's eyebrows shot up. "That true, Goodwin?" I nodded. "Briggs confirmed it this afternoon. Scared stiff. But he said no one else writes those looping numerals like Vance. He signed off where he thought no one would notice. Just once, and that was enough." The silence that followed was thick. Vance's smile faltered, then twisted into something darker. "So I left one fingerprint. One. You think that will hold in court?" "Yes," Wolfe said, his tone final. "Because it confirms what logic already proves, that you orchestrated the fraud. Miss Ansell killed Talbot out of fear of you. Briggs cooked the books for you. Klein sank into debt you offered to cover. Carter trembled in silence because of you. Your web collapses, Mr. Vance, because its strands all point back to you." Vance's mask slipped then, just for a heartbeat. The smile vanished, the eyes narrowed, and the man underneath, the ruthless predator Cotter had described, flashed through. Then it was gone, replaced with the polished facade again. "Very well," he said coldly. "Do what you will." Kramer stood satisfied. "I'll do plenty." "You're coming with me, Vance. Fraud, conspiracy may be accessory to murder if the DA plays it right. You've got enough rope around your neck to hang a circus." Vance rose, still composed, but his silence said more than words. He walked out flanked by Kramer, leaving behind the faint trace of cologne and the weight of his arrogance. The house settled once they were gone. Cotter exhaled like a man surfacing after drowning. "It's over," he whispered. Wolfe closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, Dominion Bank will stagger, perhaps fall. But corruption has been excised. Talbot's death is avenged." Cotter swallowed, staring at the floor. "And me?" "You will testify," Wolfe said. "And then you will live as you please. Whether you deserve peace is another matter. Cotter nodded, chastened, and excused himself to rest. Fritz collected the empty glasses. I lit a cigarette, watching Wolfe. He seemed heavier, as though the case had pressed down even on his immovable frame. "You got him," I said quietly. "You always do." Wolfe opened his eyes, fixed them on me, and spoke with that finality he saved for endings. "No, Archie. I did not get him. He got himself. Pride is the surest snare. I merely held the mirror until he saw it." He lifted his glass, finished the last of his beer, and set it down with a soft thud. "Human folly, Archie. It fattens more prisons than hunger ever did." And that was that. Fritz brought in the cheese. The rain pattered on the windows and the brownstone returned to silence. Another storm had passed, leaving only the quiet and the certainty that Nero Wolfe, immovable as ever, had once again bent the world to order.